I'm standing in 43 acres of what everyone in Hardin County said was impossible. Purple rose stretching east to west, the smell so thick in the July heat you can taste it on your tongue. Lavender. English lavender, to be exact. Lavandula angustifolia, the kind that grows in Provence, in southern England, in places where the soil drains fast and the winters don't crack the ground like a dropped plate. Not here. Not in south-central Iowa, where the clay holds water like a sponge and January will hit 20 below for a week straight. That's what Dale Hutchins told me in 2009, standing right where I'm standing now, back when this was just a failed soybean field and a mortgage I couldn't outrun. Dale ran the extension office for 32 years. He had the soil reports, the pH numbers, the frost charts. He was polite about it, the way you're polite when you're telling a man his idea is foolish, but you don't want to embarrass him in front of his wife. "Tom," he said, "lavender needs zone 7, maybe a cold 6 if you're lucky, and the drainage is perfect. You're in zone 5A. Your hard pan starts 18 inches down. You'll lose every plant by March." My neighbor, Frank Yoder, was less polite. Frank farms 1,200 acres of corn and beans, all GPS guided, all precision applied. He pulled up in his Ram 3500 the day the first shipment of bare root plants arrived, 4,000 of them, bundled in damp burlap, shipped from a nursery outside Seakim, Washington. He looked at the boxes stacked in my barn and shook his head like I'd just bought a truckload of fireworks to plant in the spring. "You know what lavender needs, Tom? It needs France. It needs somewhere that isn't here." That was April 14th, 2010, a Wednesday. I was 61 years old. My wife, Caroline, had been gone 8 months. The house was too quiet. The soybean prices had been flat for 3 years, and the field I'm standing in now had tested out so poor for nitrogen that even the co-op rep suggested I let it go to pasture. I didn't have a good reason to plant lavender. I had a bad reason, which was that I needed to do something I'd never done before, something that required me to pay attention every single day, or it would die. And I had one other thing which I didn't mention to Dale or Frank or anyone else at the time. I had my father's notebook. My father kept notebooks his entire life, not journals. He wasn't a man who wrote about feelings. These were field books, the kind surveyors use with grid paper and a canvas cover. He'd write down everything. When he turned the soil, what the weather did that week, which seed lot came from which supplier, how deep he planted, what failed, what came back stronger than it should have. He died in 1987, and I kept 4 of those notebooks in a wooden box under the workbench in the machine shed. I hadn't opened them in years. The night after Dale made his joke about France, I went out to the shed and brought the box inside. I sat at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and started reading. Most of it was corn and hay, rotation schedules, pH readings from the extension office. But in the third notebook, dated 1953 to 1956, there were 6 pages about something I'd never heard him talk about. Lavender. He'd planted a test plot in the summer of 1954. A 1/4 acre, southeast corner of what we called the Low 40. Same field I was looking at now. He got the seed from a man named Arnaud Petit, a Frenchman who'd moved to southern Illinois after the war and was trying to grow culinary herbs commercially. My father wrote that Petit told him lavender needed poor soil, sharp drainage, and full sun, and that the worst thing you could do was baby it. "Lavender doesn't want your help," my father had written in his slanted print. "It wants you to leave it alone." The notes went on for 3 seasons. He recorded germination rates, winter survival, bloom dates, oil content. He wrote about a killing frost in April of '55 that took half the plants, and how the ones that survived came back twice as thick. He wrote about the smell, like mint and camphor and something sharper, something I can't name. And then, in the spring of 1957, the entries stopped. No explanation. Just a line drawn across the page. And the next entry was about oats. I sat there until the coffee went cold. I didn't know why he'd stopped, but I knew he'd proven it could grow here, and I knew where he'd planted it. The next morning, I walked the fence line along the South 40. It was the first week of March, 2003. The ground was still frozen in the shade, soft where the sun hit. I'd walked that field 1,000 times, but I was looking for something I'd never noticed. A pattern in the weeds, a change in the soil, anything that said here. My father had been careful about a lot of things, but he wasn't a man who marked his experiments with stakes and string. If he planted something, he planted it and let it prove itself. I found it halfway down the slope, maybe 200 yards from the barn. There was a patch, maybe 20 feet across, where the thistle didn't grow as thick. The soil was lighter there, more sand, more stone. I knelt down and dug with my pocket knife. 6 inches down, the dirt smelled different, sharper. I couldn't say how I knew, but I knew. I went back to the house and called the extension office in Ottumwa. A woman named Carol answered. I told her I wanted to plant lavender. There was a pause, then a polite laugh. Lavender? Here? She said. You'd need zone 6 at the coldest. We're 5B on a good year. It won't winter over. I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, I drove to a nursery outside of Fairfield. The owner was a man about my age, maybe older, with dirt under his nails and a limp from a combine accident years back. I asked if he had lavender starts. He looked at me like I'd asked for palm trees. Won't make it, he said. Tried it myself in '98. Lost every plant by January. I asked what variety he'd used. He said he didn't remember. I asked if he'd planted it in clay or sand. He said it didn't matter. The cold would kill it either way. I bought 12 starts of English lavender anyway. Lavandula angustifolia. $22 for the lot. I planted them the second week of March, right where my father had planted his. I didn't amend the soil. Didn't mulch. Didn't water after the first week. I just put them in the ground, 8 inches apart, and walked away. My neighbor, Ed Klein, saw me from the road and stopped his truck. He leaned out the window and asked what I was doing. I told him. He shook his head. Hope, he said, you're wasting your time. Then he drove off. By the end of April, 11 of the 12 plants were standing. One had rotted at the crown, too much rain that third week. But the rest had put out new growth, gray-green and narrow, exactly like the stuff my father used to cut and hang in the barn. I didn't tell anyone. I just watched them. Every morning I'd walk out there before breakfast, before the sun cleared the tree line, and I'd run my hand over the tops. They smelled like something I'd forgotten I knew. Ed saw them again in June. He pulled over, got out this time, walked right up to the row. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, not saying anything. Then he looked at me and said, "Well, I'll be damned." I didn't say anything back. There wasn't anything to say. The plants were 2 feet tall by then, thick at the base and starting to bud. He asked what I was planning to do with them. I told him I didn't know yet. He nodded, got back in his truck and left. By mid-July, they were in full bloom. Purple spikes, hundreds of them, standing straight up like they'd been there all along. The smell carried across the whole front acre when the wind was right. I cut the first stems on July 18th, a Thursday, early in the morning while the oil was still strong. I used my father's pruning shears. the same ones he'd used in 1974, still sharp, still clean. I bundled the stems with twine and hung them upside down in the barn, same place he'd hung his. It took 3 days to dry. When I brought them down, the color had deepened to something close to gray, and the smell had concentrated into something you could almost taste. I didn't know what to do with them, so I put 20 bundles in a cardboard box and drove them to the farmer's market in Greenfield on Saturday morning. I set them on the tailgate of my truck with a hand-lettered sign, Lavender, $8 per bundle. I sold out in 40 minutes, every single one. A woman from Columbus bought 6 bundles and asked if I'd have more next week. I told her I would. She handed me $50 and said to save her 10 bundles. I wrote her name on the back of a feed receipt, Angela Ruiz. That was the beginning. I went back the next Saturday with 40 bundles. Sold out in an hour and 20 minutes. The week after that, I brought 60. Gone by noon. Angela Ruiz came every week, and she brought friends. A woman named Diane started buying bundles to resell at a craft shop in Yellow Springs. A man who ran a bed and breakfast in Lebanon bought 15 bundles at a time and asked if I could deliver. I said I could. By the 4th week of August, I was harvesting twice a week and drying lavender in every corner of the barn. The smell was so thick you could walk through it like a curtain. I planted another 1/4 acre that fall. Used the same method. Cardboard, compost, gravel. Didn't tell anyone. Just did it. The second planting came up stronger than the first. By the following June, I had lavender in 2 full beds, staggered so one was blooming while the other was still green. I started taking orders by phone. Angela Ruiz called in March and reserved 30 bundles for her daughter's wedding in July. A florist in Dayton called and asked if I could supply her shop weekly through the summer. I said yes. She asked how much I could grow. I told her I'd let her know. That second summer, I sold 340 bundles between June and September. Gross revenue was $2,720. After seed, compost, twine, and gas, I cleared just under $2,000. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was enough to prove the principle. The land could do this. The lavender didn't care what the county agent said. It grew because I gave it what it needed and left it alone. I kept the notebook. I still have it. There are pages in the back I haven't read yet. One of them is titled Roses, Heirloom Varieties for Clay Soil. Another says Herbs, Culinary and Medicinal. Market Notes 1998 to 2003. I haven't tried those yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. The lavender is enough for now, but I know this. Carl Dietrich didn't write that notebook for me. He wrote it for himself because he loved the work. And when he was gone, it found its way to someone who'd use it. That's how knowledge moves, not through institutions, through hands. The second year, I planted 3 acres. I knew the risk. If the market didn't hold, I'd be sitting on more lavender than I could move. And dried flowers don't keep their value past 18 months. But I also knew something the county agent didn't. Scarcity creates demand. And I turned away buyers in August. People who wanted 50 bundles and settled for 12. A woman from Columbus who ran a soap company called me in October asking if I had any left. I didn't. She said she'd take 200 bundles next year if I could guarantee the quality. I said I'd call her in July. I expanded the drip lines in April of 2019. Bought another 400 feet of tubing and 20 more emitters from the same supplier in Fort Wayne. The invoice was dated April 9th. I remember because it snowed that night. 3 inches, wet and heavy. And I had to wait until the 12th to get the lines buried. The lavender didn't mind. It was still dormant. By mid-May, the field looked like a purple haze from the road. Drivers slowed down. A few stopped and asked if they could take pictures. I said yes, as long as they didn't walk between the rows. Harvest came early that year, July 14th, a Sunday. I started at 6 in the morning and worked until the sun made it impossible, then started again at 5 in the evening. I cut 4 acres in 3 days. My hands were stained purple to the wrist. The shed smelled so strong you could taste it in the back of your throat. I hung the bundles the same way Carl had described, upside down in the dark, with air moving through. I used an old box fan I'd pulled from the barn loft. It ran 24 hours a day for 2 weeks. The soap maker from Columbus bought 200 bundles on July 28th, paid in cash. A florist in Bloomington took 150. A woman who made sachets for weddings bought 75 and came back a week later for 50 more. By mid-August, I was sold out. 4 acres gone in 43 days. I cleared just under $9,000 after expenses. I sat on the porch that night with a glass of water and Carl's notebook open on my lap. I didn't read it. I just looked at the handwriting. Slanted, careful, patient. The kind of writing a man does when he knows no one's watching and he's doing it anyway. I planted 6 acres the following spring, April 9th, 2003. Same variety, same spacing, same method. This time I knew what I was doing. I knew when to cut, how to bundle, how long to hang. I knew the soap maker would call in late July, and the florist would want hers by the first week of August. I knew the sachet woman would buy whatever I had left. I didn't guess. I planned. The second harvest came off cleaner than the first. I cut on July 11th, a Thursday, just after dawn. The dew was still on the stems, but the sun was already warming the air. I worked alone. Took me 4 days. I hung everything in the barn by July 15th. The fan ran. The air moved. 2 weeks later, I started filling orders. This time, I sold out in 31 days. Cleared $14,000 after seed, fuel, and twine. By the 3rd year, I had 8 acres in Lavender. The Dawson brothers stopped making jokes. One of them asked if I needed help with harvest. I said no. Not because I was stubborn. Because I wanted to know every plant, every row, every bundle. I wanted to feel the work the way Carl must have felt it when he was out here alone in 1971. Planting something no one believed in. The 4th year, I added 2 more acres and built a drying shed out of reclaimed barnwood, and tin roofing I bought at auction for $60. I ran 3 box fans inside and hung the lavender on wire I strung wall to wall. It worked better than the barn. Faster, cleaner, more control. I sold $16,000 worth that summer. Paid off the property taxes for 3 years in advance. Fixed the roof on the house. Bought a used brush hog that actually started when I turned the key. People started coming to the farm in late June just to see it. They'd pull off the county road and walk along the edge of the field with their phones out, taking pictures. I didn't mind. A few of them bought bundles right there, cash in hand, $10 each. One woman from Indianapolis asked if I did tours. I said no. She bought 40 bundles anyway. By 2006, I had 12 acres and a waiting list. That's when the trouble started. Not the kind you see coming. The kind that walks in wearing a suit and calling itself opportunity. March 2007. A man named Derek Paulson showed up at the farm in a black Lexus. He worked for a company out of Chicago called Heartland Botanicals. They supplied essential oils and dried herbs to Whole Foods, Williams-Sonoma, boutique hotels. He'd heard about my lavender from someone at the Indianapolis farmers market. He wanted to buy my entire harvest, all of it, 12 acres worth. He offered me $42,000, paid up front, with a 3-year contract and a price escalator tied to wholesale herb indexes I'd never heard of. I told him I'd think about it. He left his car on the kitchen table. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. I didn't call. 2 weeks later, he came back with a revised offer. $50,000, and they'd help me expand to 20 acres. They'd front the cost of the plants. I'd repay it out of future harvests. He had a binder full of projections, graphs that curved upward, like a hawk taking off. He talked about market penetration and brand alignment and consumer sentiment around domestic sourcing. I listened. I didn't say much. When he left the second time, I walked out to the field and stood there until the sun dropped behind the tree line. The offer was more money than I'd made in any 5 years combined. It was enough to replace the tractor, redo the well, maybe even build a real drying barn with climate control and ventilation like the extension agent kept talking about. But something about it didn't sit right. The waiting list I had, those were people who came back every year. They knew my name. They knew the field. Some of them had been buying since that first summer when I had 4 acres and a card table. If I signed with Heartland, all of that would go to a warehouse in Chicago, get repackaged under someone else's label, sold to people who'd never heard of Hancock County. The Lavender would still be mine in one sense, but it wouldn't be mine in the sense that mattered. I called a meeting that Sunday afternoon. Not formal, just told folks on the waiting list that I'd have coffee and cookies out by the drying shed at 2 o'clock if anyone wanted to stop by. I wasn't sure anyone would come. Turned out 23 people showed up. Some I recognized from year one. Others were newer. A woman from Columbus who said she drove 4 hours each way because my lavender was the only kind that didn't give her migraines. A man who ran a bakery in Findlay and used it in shortbread. A couple from Toledo who bought 10 pounds every July for their wedding anniversary business. They made favors. Little muslin bags with hand-tied ribbon. I told them about the offer. Told them the number. Told them what Heartland wanted. Told them I hadn't signed anything yet. I didn't ask for advice exactly. I just wanted them to know that if they came back next summer and saw a Heartland Organics truck in my driveway, they'd understand why. Nobody said much at first. Then the woman from Columbus spoke up. She said, "If you sell to them, I'll lose this." Not angry, just factual. She said she'd tried lavender from 4 other farms and 2 co-ops, and none of it worked the same. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the soil here. Maybe the way I dried it. Maybe just luck. But she knew that if it went into a Heartland bag with a barcode and a lot number, it wouldn't be the same thing anymore. Even if it came from the same field. The baker nodded, said he'd been using my lavender for 6 years, and his customers asked for it by name now. Not lavender shortbread. Hope's lavender shortbread. He said, "You do what you need to do. But I'm just saying, what you've got here isn't just a crop. It's a reputation." I thought about that word for a long time after they left. Reputation. Not the kind you buy with an ad or a logo. The kind you build one sale at a time, 1 year at a time. One person telling another person that this one's worth the drive. I called Heartland the next morning, Tuesday, April 9th, 2019. Told them I appreciated the offer, but I was staying independent. The woman on the phone, her name was Jennifer, went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Mr. Hope, I need to be honest with you. If you turn this down, we'll likely approach one of your neighbors. We need a lavender supplier in this region, and if it's not you, it'll be someone else. Within 2 years, you'll be competing with our distribution network. I'm not saying that to threaten you. I'm saying it so you understand what you're choosing." I thanked her and hung up. Sat there at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold. She wasn't wrong. If Heartland wanted lavender from Iowa, they'd get it. They'd find someone with more land than me, someone younger, someone who'd take the contract and the upfront payment and plant 40 acres instead of 4. And when that happened, every store that carried my sachets would get a call offering them the same product for 30% less with guaranteed supply. I'd seen it happen to the Kowalskis with their honey. Seen it happen to the Rasmussens with their apple cider. You can have the best product in the county, but if someone undercuts you by a third and delivers it to the buyer's door, most people take the deal. I walked out to the field that afternoon. The lavender was just starting to green up, little gray-blue shoots coming through the mulch. I knelt down and ran my hand over them. Thought about my father, about that 44 square feet he left me, about the way he never expanded, never borrowed, never tried to be bigger than what he could manage with his own 2 hands. He used to say, "You can't control the market, but you can control the quality. And if the quality's good enough, the market comes to you." I didn't know if that was still true. Maybe it was in 1965, maybe not in 2019. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to find out by handing my field over to someone else's logo. I called the broker back the next morning, told him no. He asked if I was sure, said the offer might not come around again. I said I was sure. He hung up polite enough, but I could hear it in his voice. He thought I was a fool. I spent the next 2 weeks working the field alone, weeding by hand, checking the drip lines, walking the rows at dawn and dusk the way my father used to. I didn't advertise, didn't post anything online, just kept doing what I'd been doing. Then in late June, a woman from Columbus called. Said she'd bought a sachet at the farmer's market 2 years back, kept it in her car, and when it finally lost its scent, she went looking for more. Couldn't find anything like it. Took her 3 weeks to track me down. She ordered 6 pounds. Paid up front. A week later, a restaurant in Cleveland called. Then a soap maker in Ann Arbor. Then a florist in Louisville. Every one of them said the same thing. They'd tried other suppliers, but the scent wasn't the same. Too weak, too chemical, too something. They wanted mine. By August, I was sold out. 44 square feet, 600 plants, and I could have sold twice that if I'd had it. I didn't raise my prices. Didn't need to. The people who wanted it were willing to wait until next year. Some of them put down deposits in September. The broker never called back. I heard later that the operation he was working with planted 200 acres down in southern Ohio. Big money, big equipment, everything by the book. They harvested in July, got it to market by August. But the buyers didn't come back. The scent was fine, they said, just fine. And that was the problem. I'm 71 now. I still work that same plot my father left me. I've added a few rows over the years, but not many. I could expand. People ask why I don't. I tell them the same thing my father would have told them, because I can't watch more than this and still do it right. You want to grow lavender, you grow lavender. You want to grow a business, that's something else. I'm not against it. But I know what I am. If you've got a small piece of ground and people telling you it won't work, maybe listen to the ground instead. Subscribe if this one meant something to you. And if you've got your own 44 square feet, I'd like to hear about it.